So, good evening, everyone, and Happy New Year. This is our first Lovely People webinar of 2019. And so we have as our lovely guest this evening, Jonathan Shaddock, who's going to be joining us and talking about his experiences of the principles and what he is seeing when he's looking in this direction. So it would be great, Jonathan, if it's okay with you, if you introduced yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are, just in case anyone watching this doesn't know.
Okay, cool. Well, yes, my name's Jonathan, and I live in Plymouth in the southwest of England, not very far from your good souls in the north of Devon. Here I am in the south of Devon. And I was born in Plymouth, and I grew up here, and then I left Plymouth and went to a number of different places, and then found my way back here again, and I've been living back in Plymouth now for a number of years, and I'm sure something of that journey will come out as we unfold in our conversation this evening. And what else would you like to know about me?
How did you come across this understanding? What brought you here tonight?
Okay, my understanding of the three principles. I've been thinking about that quite a bit today, and it would be very easy to launch in and say, when I heard about the three principles literally, formally, as a kind of model, if you like. But I guess I would really like to emphasize that all people, it is my understanding that all people, we are the three principles, and that we've been living the principles all of our lives. And very many of us can look back, once we look through this lens of our understanding of the principles, we start to see perhaps how we came across an understanding of the truth of ourselves and life to start with, and it might have been many moons ago. So I'd like to go back to that really at the beginning, if that's okay.
Perfect.
Cool. So I grew up here in the city of Plymouth, and we lived not far from the city centre. And I was walking to and from school to school every day. And I guess it was a 10 or a 15-minute walk, and I would walk along and meet up with other friends, and we'd soldier on up to school together, have the day together, and walk home together. And one evening, we had an evening meeting in the school, and I was walking along up the hill and made my way there and walked back again. And on the way there and back, I passed a church, and I was aware that this was just one of many buildings on my route to and from school. And I'd never thought much about it. There it was standing there, and I'd walked past it on the way to school, and I'd walked past it on the way back from school. And every so often a bell would ring in it, which kind of drew my attention. And I was aware many, many, many times over the years that when this bell rang, from time to time, I would kind of go quiet. I'd just be aware that this bell was tolling for a while, and it kind of made me stand still sometimes. And I was aware that there was a quiet in me, but really didn't give it a lot of meaning. I didn't think too much about it. And on this particular evening, I was aware that as I walked past this building, that the bell started to ring. And again, I just carried on and I went up to the school. And on the way home, I was just walking past it, and before I knew it, I was inside. Don't ask me what it was that pulled me in there, but something certainly did pull me in there. There was no thinking about it too much. 1 minute I'm walking along the street in the same old route of every day, and the next minute I'm inside this building. And I walked into a corner of the building where there was a light on, and it was all very quiet there, but I was drawn to this space. What it was that was drawing me, I couldn't put a finger on, but there I was. And I sat down and I fell into a deep peace and quiet. And I felt so incredibly peaceful and so at home and so at rest. And I would find it very difficult to describe the experience that I had with anybody. I just knew that it was totally and utterly amazing. And after a little while, I got up and I went home. And I didn't give it an awful lot of thought then. But something kept drawing me back to that peace and quiet. Mm-hmm. So I went again from time to time, but I didn't get the same feeling. And I was quizzical about that. So I was trying to get the feeling and wondered what it was that I had to do to get that feeling. Mm. So I started going to church services, and I also started to join things like the Cubs and the Scouts and other organizations that were on there. And on this route, because I really knew that I'd had this feeling, but I wanted to have it again, and I wanted to know more about it. And the more and more I tried, the more it evaded me. But to cut a long story short, I was drawn to this spirituality and to its practices. And I would learn the words and I would do the practices. And sometimes the feeling came back a bit, but it didn't always. And I didn't understand that, and I was really confused by it. Mm. Then my journey goes on some more. And I guess I've always had an interest in what makes the mind work. And I've also had an interest in what I've come to understand as spirituality. And I had many questions about it. So I followed all sorts of organizations. I followed all sorts of philosophies. And then I got really interested in psychotherapy and counseling, in which I trained, because I was really trying to understand my own mind and the minds of my family. And I started to learn many different modalities of counseling and psychotherapy. And I guess I've gone the route of so many people who have learned this mode and this understanding and that understanding to kind of try and make sense of my mind. Yeah. And also very often to get out of the experience that I was having. You know?
Yep.
I wanted that peace back, and I wasn't getting it, basically, very often. So time went on, and I settled into a number of those understandings of life and of the mind, and I really got into them, and I benefited a lot from them myself, and I shared them with many other people in the most beautiful conversations that we had. People would come along and they'd be struggling in one way and another, and I felt I really had something to offer them. And I guess the highlight that I have in mind, because this brings me to the bridge of the principles, if you like, is that I went for some training called EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique. And it seemed great to me. I thought, this is the answer. There's a lovely understanding of how there are meridian points in our bodies, and we can tap into them, and we can get into a very special energy. And any experience that we have and any sort of thinking that we're having that's troubling us, we can tap it down.
Mm.
And I really got into it, and I thought it was the bee's knees. It helped me a lot. I had some very transformational experiences, and I worked with many other people who seemed to have transformational experiences too. But I got to the place where I realized that it didn't always work. And I began to wonder, was I going to have to tap myself and help tap other people for the rest of my life? And it was at that time that the person who had taught me EFT was coming across the understanding of the principles. And that was shared from time to time. And I got interested in it, and I hung around to see what this journey was about. And but I didn't understand it at first, because I was looking at it from an intellectual perspective.
Yeah.
Here it was, I was learning about mind, about consciousness, and about thought. And it sounded like many of the other therapeutic models that I'd looked at in the past. That's how it looked and sounded to me. And I guess I got a bit lost, really. The more I searched, the more confused I got, because I thought innocently that the three principles was another therapeutic endeavor. And that if I understood what mind was, what consciousness was, and what thought was, if I understood that, really understood it intellectually, and did any practices that came along with it, only there weren't any, that I would be happy. And that if I shared that understanding with other people, then they would be okay too. And then one day I just gave up. I thought, blow it, I'm not going to try and understand this anymore. And I'll never forget that day, because I took my lovely dog out for a walk, and I'm walking across the fields, and suddenly I had an insight. I went very quiet inside. I was very still. I felt like a weight had been taken from my shoulders. And I had that same feeling that I got in that quiet church that night. And I understood on that day that this isn't an intellectual enterprise. There's nothing to be learned. There's nothing really to get. But there's an essence inside of each and every one of us. And we never know when we're going to touch into that essence. But once we have touched into it, and then we have conversations with other people, they get to feel that. We communicate it in all sorts of levels, but it's not really through an intellectual understanding.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And that's so true. And it also kind of answers one of those questions, because I know when we kind of say there's nothing to get, there's nothing to know, it can kind of get, well, why do you talk about this then? Why do you do it? Because there's nothing anyone needs to know. There's nothing anyone needs to get. They've already got it. And it can get quite confusing. But I think, you shared that beautifully, that, yeah, there isn't anything, you don't need to add anything to yourself. but somehow being pointed in that direction. And that is absolutely why we have these conversations, because like you, suddenly I became aware of something more than just what I thought I was. You know, I became aware of this deeper part of me, and it's opened up my life in ways I just never thought were possible, just through being a part of these conversations. And you just don't know when somebody's going to hear something in what we were sharing. So you very briefly mentioned the principles, and you kind of named them: mind, thought, and consciousness. Because sometimes I know we have new people watch these, watch the recordings of these, and I don't know whether there's anyone on here who hasn't heard about them a lot. So will you share a little bit more about your understanding of the principles, what they are, what that means? What does mind, thought, and consciousness even mean?
Okay, lovely. A very rich question, and many principles practitioners and many people who come across what we call the three principles try and answer that, and I guess we never know how the answer is going to come out in any particular time. Because if we rehearse it, which we can all do, we can say there are three principles and we can start getting very philosophical, but it seems to me that we communicate that much more deeply when we're not trying to communicate it. But I guess the first thing that I want to say is this. This may sound contradictory, I hope it doesn't, but, there's one principle as far as I'm concerned. It's one divine reality which we are all part of, a creative process. But we all seem to find it too simplistic to say that it's one. Being complicated human beings, we seem to need other things to hang it onto. So we come up with other words. And I think that Sid Banks, the originator of the three principles, was very amused that when his journey started to unfold and he was sharing the principles with people, people were finding not just 1, 2, and 3 principles, but they were finding 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I think the number just escalated. But the most important one for me is mind. There's something that Sid Banks called divine mind or mind, and it's who and what we are. It's the system that runs us. And we're living out of mind all the time. There's a deep, deep energy in us, a creative energy that's bubbling up all the time. And it bubbles up in a myriad of different ways. And it bubbles up in the form of our thoughts and of our consciousness, of our aliveness, of our awareness of our thoughts. And we make the great mistake in honing in on our thoughts and thinking that that's who we are. And I see that my big insight, it feels, or it sounds very simplistic to say, but I realized that I wasn't my thoughts. That all this wonderful thought stream that we're all having day by day by day, which is a sort of engine of life, it's how we operate. We wake up in the morning and we have thoughts, and many of them are very beautiful, very creative, and they take us through life. But we get very, very, very caught up in our individual thoughts and think that that's who we are. And it's not until I understood that we are, in fact, the energy behind the thoughts. We're the power, we are the power, and we're driven by the power that gives birth to the thoughts. So there's a lovely invitation here for people to step back from the thoughts that they have. You know, we have thousands of them every day, and we spend a lot of time battling them, and it doesn't do us much good at all.
No, a battle we usually lose, I think.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's a wonderful experience when we can find a quietness inside of ourselves once we've touched into that space and we get to know it, where we can just witness the bubbling up of this energy that we call thought, and we begin just to watch it like a river bubbling along and just see the simplicity of it, the beauty of it and the simplicity of it. And sometimes it's splashing up against rocks, and we get very interested in the rock or the stones that seem to be blocking the flow. But it's a quietness that we're after.
Mm. I'm aware that Carey has put his hand up, so I don't know whether he's done it by accident or whether he has got a question. So,
Okay.
hang on, let me see. I can unmute him. Can you? Oh. Can you hear me, Carey? He's not muted.
Right.
I don't know. Carey, are you there? Have you got a question? No, maybe he just put his hand up by accident. If you have, just unmute yourself, Carey, if you can do that, or you can type in your question if you would prefer. We'll see if he comes back and asks it again. So he's not, his video's not on, so I can't see if he's done it by accident or as we do with technology, press the buttons. So if someone came to you and they were struggling, you know, like struggling along in life, what is it that you would share with them, and how do you think that simply sharing this understanding helps people?
It's a lovely, rich question. I'm beginning to understand that it's not about me, for starters. It's not about me setting out to share. If somebody comes along to see me because they're struggling in one way and another, I really want to listen to them, and I don't want to say too much, really, to begin with. I like to provide a quiet space in which people can share of themselves. And I'm listening for their insights, because everybody has them. And sometimes people are so busy talking about the flow of their thinking that they don't notice that they've had an insight. Does that make sense? And sometimes it's the most beautiful thing to say to somebody, because the sorts of conversations that we have with people in a setting where we're meeting together to understand life is a very different one from everyday conversation. When we're, you know, battling for space, you know, we all want our say. And it seems to me that we very rarely are truly heard. And one of the most beautiful things about what we might call a 3 principles session is our listening, that we just make ourselves available. And we're just listening to everything that unfolds. And I find that when people are really listened to, deeply listened to, that seems to provide an access point for something deeper within. And I've not really come across another human being since I've grown in my understanding of the principles that doesn't have insights. It's just that very often we don't catch our own insights, and we don't really hear each other's insights because we're too busy talking ourselves. Now, don't get me wrong, I've had to learn to shut up, because I'm sure there are many people on screen at the moment, and there might be many people listening to the recording of this webinar in the future that's fallen into this trap. We get so excited about sharing what we know that we end up not listening to the person that we're engaging with, or the group of people that we're engaging with. So to listen very, very deeply is the most special gift that we could ever give to another human being. And when we do listen very deeply, we can hear the insights that people are having. And I find it's very beautiful sometimes just to be very quiet with somebody else and hear them sharing their insight and then reflect it back to them. Because when we say very quietly, do you know, I was very touched by this that you said earlier, and they may not realize that they've said it. But time might go on, and the rest of the story might be very busy. And then they have another insight, and that gets reflected back as well. And after a while, people begin to see something, and they're more interested in listening out for this other stream that's at work in us that's not been noticed before. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, it is. And I absolutely agree. I think it is really, really easy to get so excited about what we've seen for ourselves and heard that we want, in the nicest possible way, we want to give it all to somebody. And yeah, sometimes we a few weeks ago, I can't remember the dates, we did a silent retreat, and the amazing learning from just spending time together and not speaking, just kind of being.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. And the biggest thing that I got from that was seeing how much more quickly our thoughts just pass when we can't do anything with them, because we weren't speaking, so there was nobody to tell about what I was thinking. There was nobody, and we couldn't get into each other's business either. And it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful, to just have that quiet space.
Yeah.
Mm.
So for me, that's vital. Of course, I have an enthusiasm about sharing the principles, my understanding of the principles, but I really want to emphasize that this isn't an intellectual endeavor, is it? It's what we might call matters of the heart. There are many, many, many ways of sharing our true selves, our inner spirit, with another human being. And it's just really very beautiful when we get the opportunity to do that, whether it's in a one-to-one, whether it's in a seminar, whether it's in a meeting, when we just get to sit in this, what I might call in this moment, this divinely quiet space together. And if we can introduce that to people, then I know the most amazing things happen. And I've learned so much that, and I've learned the hard way, because when I first came across the principles, And as I said, I'd spent a long time trying to understand mind, consciousness, and thought, and got all into a big intellectual pursuit about that. But I hadn't really heard Sid Banks say it. But then just recently, driving along in the car, I heard him in one of his Long Beach lectures, I think it was, saying, don't ever try to say more than a sentence, or don't write more than a paragraph on each of the three principles, because it will just get you into the most terrible trouble. There's a simplicity here, you know, we're alive, we're part of global life, and that's mind. And we think. There's an energy that's going on in us, which very often is expressed in what we call thought form. But I believe it's expressed in lots of other ways as well. And then there's the gift of consciousness. You know, we're aware that we're alive. We're aware that we're thinking. We get feelings that are attached to our thinking, the fruit of our thinking. But it's when we get to understand the divine nature of that experience, you know, what's there before and beyond it, that we truly understand what those three principles are all about. But it's so simple. And I didn't get that at first. As I said, I got all enthusiastic and I listened to other people's recordings and I read books and I tried to explain the principles to people. And yes, of course, we're always going to tell our story and we're going to share what we know, but it's not necessarily what is going to help people. It seems that it's this quiet. When we fall into that space of quiet, then we are at our very best and we communicate the very depths of who we are as a human being. And don't ask me how it happens. I just don't fully understand how it operates. But I know without a shadow of a doubt that when I am in that space myself, then transformations seem to happen for other people too. We kind of get to be a presence where people can come and look in the mirror, as it were.
Yeah.
So I'd like to give a little example of that, really.
That would be perfect.
Part of my work, because I have a number of different jobs, if you like. I'm a coach, and I'm also a massage therapist, and I'm also a funeral celebrant.
Oh.
So this afternoon, I've had the wonderful privilege of going along to the local crematorium and celebrating a funeral for a man who died around Christmas time. I celebrated his wife's funeral with the family back in April, and just a few months later, this lovely man has died, and his family came back and asked me if I would be with them in creating a service at the crematorium today. So I went along, and it was a very beautiful celebration. And I knew that I wanted to share the principles with these people. But I certainly didn't want to stand up and start formally talking about mind, consciousness, and thought. But what I did want to do is fall back into that space from which the principles spring, back into that quiet space inside from where I exist as a human being, and just be alongside those other people in their grief. So I facilitated a space where I could share a little about my understanding of life and death, which I did very, very briefly. And then I encouraged the family to create a eulogy of this lovely man. And they stood up, a number of them stood up and read poems and talked about his life and shared the experiences of their childhood. And it was all very beautiful and tender and loving and very meaningful. And then after all that was over, I knew that if I wasn't careful, I could use up this space of the 45-minute slot that we get given at the crematorium, and I could try and share some wisdom with them. But instinctively, I knew that wasn't the thing to do. So I invited them into a space of silence. And as all I did was say to everybody gathered there, you know, we've celebrated a lot of words here today, and we've heard a lovely eulogy, and we've heard some poems, and we've sung some songs together. But now I would like to invite you into a space of silence. And I just shared very, very briefly with them what I felt that silence could be and could mean for us, that we could just settle back in to who we truly are beyond our stories. And we had a few minutes of silence together. And at the end of the silence, we had another piece of music, and then we filed out of the crematorium. And when I arrived outside of the building, there were the family gathered, and they were looking at the flowers, and they were greeting their friends and their other members of the family. And I just put myself in a quiet corner, and I was admiring the lovely human exchanges that were unfolding. And I was kind of just being there, and in a way making myself available in case anybody else wanted to come up and talk to me. Because, you know, by instinct, I could have just started moving around amongst the circle there and chatting to people and asking how they were and trying to make sure that everything was okay for them. But I knew that according to the principles, we're all perfectly all right. And whatever our experience going on, whether it's bereavement, whether it's sorrow, whether it's joy, whether it's deep remembering, it's all perfect just as it is. And it was just so very beautiful watching every person there who is the three principles on two legs, each and every one of them. I was just rejoicing in their experience and witnessing them and noticing their exchanges, and notice some of them being very quiet. And after a little while, I noticed that people started coming over towards me. And it's lovely watching human beings. Some of them circle around a little bit and wonder if they're going to pluck up the courage to say something. Other people come boldly right up and say, thank you ever so much for the day, and it was really lovely, and thank you for what you said. But I just stood there quietly and made myself available and tried to be very connected with who I really am inside in that quiet space. Well, I left there in tears today because the beautiful things that people shared with me and the insights that they shared with me were quite literally mind-blowing. And I've come away even more certain that we don't have to preach the principles to anybody. Is all we need to do is create beautiful spaces in whichever way we can, whether that's in a funeral celebration, whether it's in a counseling or a coaching celebration, whether it's in a webinar like this, whether it's in a seminar or a group meeting. We just need to remain anchored in that place of who we are, and people will have insight. There's something that I'm going to find very difficult probably to put into words, actually, because it was so simple, but it was so deep. One of the elderly members of this group came over. He was a golfing friend of the man who had died. And he shuffled over and just stood silently beside me for a while. And then he started to talk and said that he was this guy's friend and that they played golf together, and how much he'd enjoyed the service this afternoon. And then he looked me in the eye and a tear came up in his eye. And he said, "Today, I know this is going to sound ever so funny," he said, "but you had his expression on your face. You had his twinkle in your eye. It was as if he was present through you," he said. And then he tried to express a little bit more of where he was going. And then he just looked at me really deeply into my eyes and said, "We're all connected, you know, aren't we? We're all the same, really. We're really all just one."
Mm.
And bang, in that minute, he had told me everything I need to know about him, about me, and about every other single human being on this planet. We're all an intimate part of the one divine creative energy that made this planet. We're all one. And most of the time we forget that, and we're running around thinking we're separate and we're ego and we're I am, and believing that we're at odds with each other. And we're not. But once we've understood who we truly are, we'll never look back. And it seems to me that the more rooted we can be in that space, then we will have the most amazing connections with other human beings. Some people are nodding.
I think you've taken us to that space absolutely beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's the simplicity of this understanding, isn't it?
Yeah.
Go to that space and nothing more needs to be said. It blows my mind when you're with somebody and you go there, and like you described that man, people start then telling you the solutions to their problems or what they've seen or about this connection. Given that space, we all already know this, don't we?
We do. We do.
It is just so easy to get caught up in everything that's going on, the stuff.
Yeah.
Shall we see if anyone would like to ask any questions or join in the conversation, or if anyone has got anything that they would like to add?
Surely.
That would be lovely. So if anyone has got anything, you can either wave your hand or you can unmute yourself. But we would love, if anyone's got anything they would like to add or ask Jonathan or anything like that, please feel free to make yourself known. One of the really lovely things that I've noticed happening with these webinars is how quiet everybody goes. And I think, I just think it's so lovely when our minds have just gone to that place of being quiet. And
I love the way that we all touch into this space, but then our thinking mind comes in and says, well, that's all very well. I know I get that experience, but there must be something else. There must be something else to understand, because we've been trained to be thinking, intelligent, intellectual beings. So there's always something more to get. And the wonderful mystery of this is there's nothing more to get. But that which we've already got, and we know we've got it, it will bubble up for us again and again and again through our lives in the most unexpected ways. It will sometimes happen when we're on our own and we just have a moment. At other times we'll be watching a film or reading a book, and suddenly we drop into that silent, beautiful, creative space. And very often, thank goodness, as we know, it happens when we're sharing with other human beings.
It is interesting, isn't it, how our mind wants to kick in and say, there must be something more.
Yeah.
And even when we have insights, I've noticed, like, very often the words of an insight are just the same words. You just see, and it's very difficult to describe that you've just seen the same thing on a different level. It's but I think also the other absolutely beautiful thing is pointing people in the direction of insights, and seeing this and seeing it more deeply is the most normal, ordinary thing. We do this all the time.
Yeah. And feeling it more deeply. We often make the mistake of thinking that insight has words to it, but insight has a feeling. And it's there that our understanding will become much deeper, I feel, because otherwise we get caught up in the intellectual aspect of it again. We have an insight, it has some words to it, and then we set about trying to understand the words, and it won't lead us anywhere. It will just take us away from the very powerful feeling that we had, which, because we're human beings, has some thought attached to it. And then we start trying to understand it in terms of that. But I know that many, many, many people that I share the principles with, and many people that I have learned from in the principles, will say that very often we know that there's been a depth in our understanding of who we are, and a depth in our understanding of life and the way it works, and it had no words attached to it whatsoever. It was just a deep, quiet knowing that can be very often very difficult to put into words. People sign up to three principles practitioners trainings, and they're beautiful, and it's a really worthy thing to do, because we need people to be confident in sharing. You know, that's really fantastic, especially if we're going to make podcasts and try and spread the word, or host webinars, or be a coach. It's really very wonderful that we have these trainings. But I'd really like to celebrate that man I met today. And I know it might not have made any sense to him if I'd said, oh, you could go off now and be a sharer of this. But he can. And I'm sure he does each and every day. You know, and he might even do greater things than I will ever be able to, simply because he's able to drop into that space within himself and share from there.
Yeah. There is something about grounding, isn't there? There's something about, I remember very, very early on when I first came across the principles, listening to George Pransky speaking about, you know, the simplicity behind the principles, and the person that was interviewing him was kind of saying, well, the words that you said are just so easy to just go and recite. And he said, you know, anybody could kind of share like this. And I remember George saying the difference when you listened to Sid, when he was, whatever he said it wouldn't have mattered what came out of his mouth. He said it was just the place that he was inside him when these words came out of his mouth was just so grounded that, you know, and it's interesting having conversations where there just simply are no words to describe what it is we're sharing. And then we try and have a conversation around it. It's kind of a little crazy, but crazy good. And it is just, I think one of the biggest things for me was when I really saw that this isn't on me at all.
Mm-hmm.
You know, every single human being, we are pointing them towards something that is already theirs.
Yeah.
And it's just like putting a highlighter pen through their life of, look, see it there, see it there, see it there.
And even just commenting, like I said earlier about hearing people's insights when they don't know that they've had one, just reflecting that back to people. I love the fact that you can say this, and people get a bit discombobulated. Oh gosh, yes, I did say that, didn't I? And then they understand that they already know, but they've just got distracted by their thinking and by their feelings. That's all.
So I'm just wondering if anyone, we've had a few more people join us, and I just wondered if there was anyone who has got a question or anyone who would like to add anything to the conversation. You are most welcome to join in and comment or ask a question.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Hi. Hi. Good to see you. I hope you're feeling okay.
Yeah. I only just videoed myself because I've got a bug and I don't want to breathe on anybody.
Well, hopefully we can't get your bug through the computer. So did you have a question?
I just want I wanted to say that I was really moved by what Jonathan just said. That experience he had with that man made me feel I was really moved by that. I was imagining, you know, that experience for him of seeing you and you holding the spirit of, you know, of the person who had recently died. And also what you said was really helpful, because we've just lost a friend, a very dear friend. Mm-hmm. And I've been struggling. It only happened 2 days ago, and I've been struggling with how to support my partner in it.
Yeah.
today I've been getting in feeling sort of a bit lost in it, because the circumstances of his death are very sad. And trying to find ways that I could support and help him. But what you said sort of reminded me that I just probably need to just let go of it a bit. And, you know, my partner's quite a sensible sort of person and quite a connected sort of person. And I think I just need to sort of try and be with him and be present with him, and everything will sort itself out. But it has been, you know, what you said was helpful and reminded me that really there's nothing to do particularly, just not to panic.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for that. I'm off again. Bye.
Bye. Oh, that's lovely. That's so rich.
It is very easy for us to get into the place of believing that there's lots for us to do and that we need to make everybody okay or make ourselves be okay. And it's good to be reminded, isn't it? That,
Yeah.
Has anyone else got a question or anything else that they would like to add? Because I am aware of the time. Goodness gracious me. Time goes so quickly.
Given that it doesn't exist, it goes very quickly.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. For something that doesn't exist, it moves very quickly.
Lovely.
It's been really, really gorgeous having a conversation with you, Jonathan. We keep saying, you know, we do live close enough together to get together, and, you know, maybe one time we will have to do something in person together. It would be lovely to have you come here to one of our events or something, because it's been really, really lovely to catch up with you tonight. And you took us into that beautiful place. Just, that was gorgeous. You led us there, and that was really lovely. So thank you. That was very special.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It is beautiful to connect like this, and we were together recently in Spain, and I'm watching with interest all the wonderful things that you do there. And I know that I've been very caught up with a number of things which have prevented me from joining you on a number of occasions. But yeah, I look forward very much to what we might do. Excellent.
No, yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you. It was beautiful. It was lovely listening to you, and gorgeous. It was, you have such a lovely way of just pointing in this direction. So
thank you. Yeah. Well, love to you all. And I'm aware that, you know, you invited people to ask questions or to make a point, and not everybody did. But if anybody wants to email me or ask anything or connect, you're very welcome to. You can find me on Facebook, Jonathan Shaddock, or my email address is simply my name, jonathanshaddock@gmail.com.
Yep, that's absolutely fine. And if anyone knows me and doesn't know Jonathan and forgets that, you know, you can find him through me. That's not a problem at all. If you ask me, I could put you in touch. Yeah. So thank you.
All right. Okay. Well, Happy New Year and good night, everyone.
Yeah. Happy New Year to you too.
Thanks.
Who is our guest next week, Beth?
Oh, we've got to say. Ivan Dimitrov. I've got no idea if I've said his name right.
Oh.
Ivan, who we met at Viva recently. He's with us next week. Hurrah! Yay!
Great.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Okay. If anyone is around and would like to join us next week, you can use the exact same link.
Little boy.
Tonight and come on that webinar. And if anyone lives close enough, we have our physical meetup tomorrow evening in Barnstable. So if you're close enough, we would love to see you there. And so Happy New Year, everybody. And thank you very, very much for joining us this evening. Hopefully see some of you again very, very soon. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Bye.
Bye.